Thompson Show.
This guy's a Pulitzer Prize winner, best-selling author. He is so generous to come spend time with us on Tuesdays. Love his take. Co-founder of DC Report, singular, dcreport.org, where you can just knock around some great takes from their contributors on everything from the environment to government to law. And he can speak about it all as well. He's David Cay Johnston, everybody. Hey, David Cay Johnston. Hey, my friend, I've been going off on this bomb train thing because I think in that story is so much that's wrong with our regulatory structure. I almost put it in quotes, regulatory structure, because it's been captured by corporate money. And I think you see it all in this horrible situation that's unfolding in Palestine, and it's continuing on into Pennsylvania and associated waterways. I wonder if you can give me your take on it.
Well, there's actually a chapter in the middle book of my Trump trilogy, It's Even Worse Than You Think, called Bomb Trains. And it's a story we first did at DC Report earlier. And now this was about the risk from shipping by rail car rather than pipeline, the very volatile crude oil that comes from the Bakken fields in North Dakota. And trains, CSX trains with 50 to 100 oil cars, in fact, run about a mile from my house several times a day. And if they add an emulsifier to the oil, it's not dangerous. But guess what? The industry went and said, oh, that's too much regulation. That's too much money. No. We don't want to have to do that. We just want to run our trains, and if they catch fire, we have insurance. And the problem in Palestine, Illinois, is not, in this case, the same material, but it's very volatile materials. And a key factor in this accident is that most trains use 100-year-old air brake technology that's very effective in stopping a train once it's manually applied. But the industry did not want to use automatic braking of the kind you have, many modern cars have. I have a 2021 electric car from Volkswagen, and if the car in front of me stops suddenly, I don't have to do anything. It hits the brakes in my car as hard as necessary, so I don't plow into that car. And the industry went, oh, no, we can't afford this. Never mind that we made billions and billions of dollars in profits. And of course, the industry will tell you, we can't afford paid time off for train conductors and other workers. So they don't, if they get sick, they have to show up for work or be penalized.
This is exactly why this story is so perfect for so much of what you talk about. It seems as though what you're saying is, these regulations that would have forced this braking technology to be on these trains, and it was actually a part of the Obama administration's push to get him on there,
right.
That was lifted by Trump's administration and helped immensely by the money, which you talk about as well, that has infested our politics.
Right. And there's a very good piece about this at David Sirota's website, The Lever, or Lever. You may put up on your website, Mark. It's outside the paywall, and it's a very solid explanation of what's going on.
We ran it last hour, as a matter of fact. I love David. Yeah, he's been a guest on the show, and his work is so good.
Yeah. He's really got his finger on the stuff. And this is just one of many issues like this where the influence of money in Washington is creating problems. For example, I have been looking into why it is that we aren't buying the COVID vaccine developed by Americans who gave the patent to the public. So there's no royalties to be paid off of it. India uses this vaccine. Every indication is it works as well as most vaccines, and yet the U.S. government isn't buying it. Instead, we're buying the heavily royalty payment-based vaccines from Pfizer, Moderna, and I think Merck, but we're not taking advantage of a reasonably good, if not equally good, product that would be vastly cheaper.
Yeah, it's the whole world of pharmaceuticals and the vaccine, particularly, because as you say, it's sort of you just drop them right into the pipeline that's already there.
Yep.
It's scandalous what's happening. I mean, I think the insulin, the insulin prices, just to digress again, then I want to double back to the train thing and give you some comments from the audience. But the insulin thing that was mentioned in the Biden State of the Union address, I don't know if there's any follow through on that. David, I feel like there's a lot of lip service that's given to these issues. And then even on the Democrat, I mean, the GOP is clearly, they're kind of like some sort of like arch villain from a Superman movie. I mean, it's just incredibly crazy. But even the Democrats are more traditionally, institutionally political. They pay lip service to something, but I don't see the follow through.
Well, the insulin price reductions, I think, are scheduled to start in 2026, which is a long way off. And I don't understand why they're not being done right away. I mean, this was a political compromise to get enough Republicans to join in passing the Infrastructure Act, that this was pushed off into the future. But we have many, many examples out there of drugs whose marginal cost of production ranges from pennies to a handful of dollars that are charging outrageous prices. I just went to fulfill a prescription today for a pill that I read on the internet. The cost of manufacturing is in the neighborhood of a couple of pennies. And the pharmacy I go to, I'm going to a different one for this one, wanted $1,833. I was like, you're kidding. Are there actually people who would pay this? Because it's not, one of these things that keeps you alive. And I hunted around. I found another pharmacy that will sell it to me for $16. They're clearly doing it as a sort of lost leader to draw you and get all your business, and I may switch to them. But this is absurd, these costs that we're paying. We have a piece at DC Report, it went up a couple of days ago, by Dean Baker about monopolies and drug prices and how we could be getting a lot better quality and volume for much lower prices if we went after price gouging. It's one thing to have a monopoly patent for a number of years, but when these patents run out, typically 17 years, the companies start filing hundreds and hundreds of new patent applications. And they say, well, now we're going to offer this drug for a completely different reason. And that should extend the patent. Why? That's not a new drug. You've had your new drug. It's run at 17 years. You should go now to a generic of that drug.
But what they do is they change that one thing, right? That one little thing, and that makes it.
Yeah, we used to treat it for A, but now we think it'll treat B, and therefore give us another 17 years. And the U.S. Patent Office, remember, the U.S. Patent Office famously about 25 years ago issued a patent for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which had been, the crusts were cut off, it was on white bread, and it was put inside a little plastic envelope. And they gave a patent for it.
That's a strong, yeah, right. Well, somebody had to have the BALLSs to ask for it. This is from Eric. I really hope that COVID would show how broken our healthcare system was and pave the way for universal healthcare. Unfortunately, only the first half happened. In other words, only showing how broken our healthcare system is.
I think that we are slowly moving forward on this. There were, I think, 5 members of Congress elected who favor universal health care, and the people they defeated in the elections in November were opponents of universal health care. And you saw how Biden, the supposedly doddering, dementia-ridden old man, played the Republicans in the State of the Union address. He let them react as you could predict they would, being rude and shouting liar and things like that. And then he said, oh, well, then we're all in agreement. We're not going to cut Medicare and Social Security. He boxed them into a corner. Republicans are going to continue to want to try to kill Social Security and Medicare because that's core of their DNA. But I actually do think that we're starting to make more progress toward universal no out-of-pocket health care. And here's the number about that, Mark, to keep in mind. First, I'll give you the number. It doesn't mean anything to anybody, including me. Our healthcare system costs 6.3 percentage points more of our economy than the French. And what does that mean in practical terms? It's the equivalent of all the income taxes paid by the 99% of Americans who make less than $500,000 a year. So if we had the French healthcare system, arguably the best in the world, universal care, you get seen right away, highly competent doctors, we could put the threshold for paying income taxes statistically at $500,000. Because the costs aren't perfect in translation, I still think we could do it at 100,000 or so.
So I'm sorry. So let me follow that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So then, what happens below 100,000? No tax.
Yeah, you
what
wouldn't pay
happens?
any income tax.
No
It's
income tax at all.
Right.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
just here's the key thing to keep in mind: the excess cost of our non-system sick care system in America, compared to the French and the Germans, who have great universal healthcare systems. The excess cost equals all the income taxes paid by everybody who makes less than $500,000 a year, and that's 99% of taxpayers.
Yeah, that's it's wild. It's pointed out the French don't eat junk food, says Leonard Krauss.
Yes, right.
There's that too. Although we're exporting as much as we can. Suzanne, who says Mark Cuban has a prescription company with deeply discounted meds. That is true.
Yep.
In response to that, there has left a vacuum for private industry like Cuban to move in and try to undercut it.
Yeah. Well, that's how capitalism works. You know, you get monopolists, and people find ways around the edges. But when the drug maker who has the monopoly is able to extend the monopoly patent rights and charge the prices that, we agree in the Constitution they should get when it's a new product for something that isn't the same, they've run through the patent. There's nothing that people like Mark Cuban can do about that. And it's just outrageous that we allow this, but try and get the public riled up to act on it.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, for the Super Bowl, we can get riled up, but for some of this stuff, let me ask you about. I'm going to double back to this whole world of transporting toxic chemicals and also transporting fuel. You talked about transporting oil. There is something in the chat. Let's just attack it this way by showing you a couple of chat comments. Pipelines are much safer, Delwood says, but they refuse to allow. Yet they want their gasoline on every corner. It is true that we have an almost reflexive sort of recoiling when you mention pipeline, but would pipelines be safer than transporting all this via rail?
Pipelines are the safest, most effective way and the cheapest way to move oil and petroleum products. On the other hand, it really matters that we have close supervision of the design of these. There's a chapter in my book, I think it's The Fine Print, about how all of downtown Bellingham, Washington would have been burned to a crisp, including the people in the jail that's right downtown and the hundreds of senior citizens in a high-rise building, but for two little boys playing in the woods with matches who ignited an oil spill so that they were killed and the forest burned, not downtown, a half a mile away. We've had horrific spills, though. We just had one with the people who have the partially built Canadian pipeline in the Midwest. And so pipelines are a good thing, but they need to be built and supervised. And I've written about how natural gas pipelines, which are related but different, many of them run underneath residential houses, hospitals, schools, office buildings, grocery stores. And once a year by law, the owners of those properties get a letter in the mail telling them about the dangers of pipelines, but not saying, oh, by the way, one of these pipelines runs right underneath your house. That's what happened in San Bruno.
I was just about to say, talk to people in San Bruno about that.
And one of the people killed in the San Bruno explosion was the State Public Utility Commission employee who had just been assigned a few days earlier to investigate safety issues with PG&E pipelines. Talk about irony.
Yeah, I mean, that's a...
What?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just getting this back on. Trains might be safer in terms of transporting oil? Some people are saying. I don't know.
No,
In terms of no.
They're under no
This is from
circumstance.
Nick. In terms of transporting oil, trains are far safer than pipelines. No. David's saying no.
Absolutely not. And there's plenty of evidence of that. Even if you do the things you should do, like emulsify Bakken oil, pipelines are still overall safer. I mean, look, there are going to be risks and dangers involved in any system to transport explosive and volatile fuels. So you want to do this in the least dangerous way possible, which means things like, let's run pipelines through cornfields, not underneath elementary schools as we do.
Don't let PG&E run the pipeline, says Colors of the Wind.
Amen to that.
Perry Joe says pipelines can't cover the entire country. And this is what you're saying, David. You're saying, yeah, I get it. But trains can be, we can step up our game in the way of trains. And it's gone just the opposite direction.
Well, first of all, we have pipelines all over the country, in every state. There are places where it's not economically efficient. You have a relatively small number of oil wells, so you're going to ship maybe even by truck from the site and then by rail. But that's a very small portion. We probably should have built a long time ago a Bakken oil pipeline. Mark, before we go, I just want to bring up something else that I tweeted about just before the show, and
please.
You didn't see. The U.S. government issued a warning last night for all Americans to immediately leave Russia. And there are lots of people there. They have family, they have a business, they're teaching on a fellowship. All Americans leave immediately because they're fearing that the Russians are going to round up Americans and on trumped up charges, convict them of crimes and send them to prison. Right after this happened, within an hour or two, Australia, Brazil, Canada, and France issued the exact same warning. And the French also said to their citizens, get out of Belarus immediately. And what I think is going on here is next week, we should expect that Putin is going to start a massive attack on Ukraine. They're going to throw huge numbers of soldiers into the front lines. I've talked with people who expect the Russian casualties because these are ill-trained troops, they're ill-equipped, and many of them were prisoners in Russian prisons who the Wagner group, mercenary group, said, come with us and we will set you free after the war if you survive. You can go back to your community. People who are murderers and rapists and other violent criminals.
Now, that's exactly right. They did. The Wagner Group brought just those people Dave was talking about. Out of prison.
And some of the people I talked to about the war tell me that we should expect 80% Russian casualties next week. Casualties are both wounded in battle and killed. So it isn't just killed, it's wounded as well. You have 80% casualties in a unit. You have no cohesion. You have no effort by the soldiers to take care of each other as a unit. And this assault in using large numbers of troops may be intended to try and turn men into hamburger to draw out where Ukrainian artillery is so they can target that artillery. But that the U.S. government and these other governments say, get out of Russia now, immediately, absolutely suggests something horrible is going to happen that we're going to be talking about probably next Tuesday or the Tuesday after.
I'm just wondering about the escalation of this conflict. It's coming up on an anniversary of the conflict, and
1 year next week. Yep.
Yeah. So it's suggested that this surge that you're talking about is coinciding with that, but it just feels as though there's a flirtation here with a serious escalation here, David Cay Johnston.
Oh, no, I think so. And I think we should be worried that Putin might use a tactical nuclear weapon in the field, which would be a horrible breakdown in world geopolitical and military affairs if it happens. But, Putin has put everything on the line with this war. And there's no way he can accept defeat, no matter how many Russians he has to kill to keep this going. And there are a number of Republicans now who are saying, we spent too much money on this war. Well, you either stop Putin now or we're going to be fighting him because the Moldovans have already said they're trying to overthrow our government. The tanks are going to come in. The Poles are worried that they're going to be under attack. I have family members from Slovakia, family members by marriage. They're all absolutely terrified that the Russian tanks are coming if the U.S. backs off. And when I went to Ukraine 5 years ago, that's what everybody expected. Because after all, Putin has said clearly for 30 years that he wants to put the old Soviet Union back together. He wants to take all those free countries and put them under the Kremlin's boot. And we need to really pay attention to this aggressive, gratuitous warfare and the Russian tradition of attacking women, children, hospitals, schools, rather than combatants. It's a cowardly way to conduct war. It's an effective way to terrorize people, and it's despicable.
Well, I mean, the mining of so many of these areas, as you say, there's sort of like a scorched earth kind of policy. We've seen it in Syria under Putin, and I mean,
and
war
in Chechnya and Georgia.
Thank you. Yeah, Russia has stockpiled weapons for years and prepared for this war. I don't know. It is interesting, David, that when you sketch this out ahead of time when these hostilities first began, it looked like it would be a walkover by the Russian troops.
Yeah,
they
I
just
think
seemed
everybody thought that the Ukrainians would just fold. And 500 years from now, military war colleges are going to be teaching this war. Two important elements here. On the Russian side, the Russian army is corrupt top to bottom. The reason generals are all rich is they say, we're conducting a war game. And then they take all the diesel fuel and gasoline and they sell it and keep the money for themselves and their entourage. And on the Ukrainian side, not a single Ukrainian military official was trained by the Russians. They were trained at West Point, Sandhurst, the U.S. Air Force Academy, the French Academy, the name of which I can't think of at the moment. And they have proven to be brilliant at tactics. And they've been aided a lot by the fact that the Russians, in their cheapskating of their military, do not use encrypted communications. So apparently we and our allies and the Ukrainians have been able to listen in on communications between Kremlin and generals in the field. And of course, they are allowing soldiers to carry cell phones, and you can listen in when they call mama or their girlfriend back home and, reveal where they are.
That is astounding, because the other thing that was ascribed to the Russians was such technological expertise, turning off the lights in Ukraine before they can, that they, once they really got their cyber people, in gear, that they would have that entire grid, essentially, they'd have ownership of that. And what you're suggesting is just the opposite. Actually, things are quite rudimentary.
Well, I mean, the Russians are very good at some things. Here in New York State, I live in Western New York up by Lake Ontario. We know that the Russians have turned on and off floodgates in hydroelectric dams. And in some areas, they're very sophisticated about these things, but their army as a whole is a Potemkin army. And I realize the Potemkin story is a fiction, but it is in line with the idea of the Potemkin army, that it's just appears to be an army when in many ways it's not. And they've suffered enormous casualties. And they haven't even been particularly good at propaganda. There was a Russian propaganda film that got out through some Western group secretly allied with the Kremlin, trying to show that Ukrainian soldiers were abusing the bodies of dead Russian soldiers. Well, in fact, the Russians abandoned their dead comrades and ran. And so the Ukrainians had to go clean up and collect the bodies to bury them. There's also a great deal of false information out there. And let's not ever forget what the number one cable talk show host in America, Tucker Carlson, said: I'm rooting for Russia.
Well, I mean, that's the one show from the West that is carried there on Russian television in Russia. I mean, of all of them. You can. I want to look forward to next Tuesday, David. We didn't even get to the balloons and the shooting down of the balloons. Let's get to that next time. And you can read more at dcreport.org. David's taken a little sort of baby step back from that, but he is the co-founder, and you can find his writings there on an ongoing basis as well, along with a lot of great journalists and a lot of great takes. Thanks so much for being here, David. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.